Hello. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much again to APSCC and the team for putting together a wonderful conference and inviting us. I'm Dara Panahy. I'm a partner at Milbank, a law firm. I lead their global space business group there, and we're a team that advise clients worldwide on commercial, corporate, strategic financing, risk management, regulatory, and restructuring matters in commercial and defense-related space, satellite, aviation, digital infrastructure, and connectivity. I'm very pleased to be joined today by a friend and a longtime client here and there, Mr. Craig Gavin, Managing Director at OpAmp Capital. Craig is running a deep tech fund that's focused on space, defense, and health tech sectors. He's a dynamic venture capitalist with a deep understanding of the space and satellite and defense market and many of the tributary and enabling technologies. He's got over 25 years of experience in various roles in the industry. He's been a senior advisor to operators, financial institutions. He was a co-founder and COO of Protostar, Asia-focused satellite startup. And before that, had key executive and technical roles at Loral, Cyberstar, Skynet, and Computer Science Corp. We're going to start with a brief presentation giving you a snapshot overview of where we are in the financing, M&A, and strategic transactions markets. And then the two of us are going to have a thematic chat, sort of breaking down some of the trends and features we're seeing. And we'll take some questions towards the end. So, team, if we can cue up the presentation, please. Thank you. So maybe start with the first page, sorry. Back some more, please. The other direction. To the top, the beginning of the presentation, please. You're just getting a preview. That's the first slide we have. Okay, then we can just start with this. I will give you some of my own sort of views before this slide just to set it up properly. There was one slide before. Here we go. Next slide, please. Thank you. Perfect. So this is the full year data we have in terms of the overall space economy. We don't have full year 2025 numbers, so you're looking at full year 2024 numbers. I'm not going to go through everything, but just to say that the industry continues to grow at a very healthy pace. Last year being led by satellite, by launch services, and then just behind that, satellite services in terms of year-on-year growth. And you see the figures. You know, one astounding number here is 11,500 plus satellites in orbit as of December 2024. You compare that with a number as of December 2022. That shows you the amount of mass being put into orbit, most of it in low Earth orbit. That's just a stunning figure. And then in terms of private and venture capital, and we'll come back to this number, we have almost $9 billion invested in private and venture money looking at the one-year period of Q2 24 to Q2 25. Again, those are the periods of time we have good numbers on. And this year, 2025, investment in US businesses, we'll talk about outside of the US as well, has far exceeded 2024 numbers. So we're going to break all this down as we continue. Next slide, please. So looking at Q2 2025, again, trailing as tightly as one can, we had the second largest quarter on record for space sector investment, both in terms of the capital raised, which was just over $3 billion, as well as the number of transactions. This was the second most prolific quarter following Q2 of 2021, which some may remember was sort of the post-SPAC craze in the space industry. This is just a representative sample of some of the transactions for Q2. What's interesting here is that almost all of the significant transactions were for relatively maturing or growth stage companies. These are not early stage, these are not seed, but these are companies that are in their C round, B round, some of them D round, and you see a nice diversity in terms of the purpose of the company: drones, electronics, launch, location tracking, infrastructure. Now, if we move forward one quarter, and this gets very interesting, going to Q3 2025, next slide, please. Last quarter was the single largest in terms of private and venture capital investment, $3.5 billion invested, and this time a broad base of activity, not just some mega rounds that are focused or concentrated in a few companies like a SpaceX mega round, as well as more diversity globally in terms of where the investments are going and the types of companies being invested in. So we're talking about data platforms, hardware, flight, infrastructure, software and engineering, and global diversity. You're seeing China starting to show up in the larger rounds as well as Europe. Next slide, please. Now, this slide gives you a broad snapshot of all kinds of activity. It's M&A, it's finance, it's strategic transactions, and it looks back about a year, October 24 to October 25. I'm not going to go through every little deal tombstone here, but a few interesting transactions that we'll thematically talk about a bit is you had AST, which is a D2D company, acquiring spectrum rights from Legato through originally Inmarsat, which is now part of Viasat. Very interesting transaction. Redwire acquiring Edge Autonomy. You had Eutelsat raising over 1 billion euros in capital in connection with sort of growth of its overall business. You had SES acquiring Link and now combined with Omnispace in terms of spectrum value, and we'll talk about what that spectrum value means going forward in terms of D2D and other applications. Voyager had an IPO, Firefly had an IPO, SpaceX engaged in an interesting transaction with EchoStar to acquire spectrum rights. AT&T bought the rest of those spectrum rights, and there's some more still at play in terms of potentially enabling further D2D build out. And a few other transactions. AST just raised another $1 billion in capital and convertible debt, and also did a share repurchase. And just yesterday, many of you have seen that what used to be called SSL, then Maxar, then Lanteris is being acquired by Intuitive Machines, which is, for those of you who have a legacy in this industry, a very interesting transaction, which I think previews where we're going in terms of space infrastructure. Next slide, please. I thought it was also very interesting to look at historic versus current expectations for the IPO market. So we've had 2 significant IPOs so far in the core space industry. I think we can expect more going forward. But what should we expect? And this is a very difficult question in the sense that if you look for any trends, the duration of IPO cycles, and IPO cycles are very finicky. They look at a combination of confidence in the market, stability in interest rates, and other factors. Historically, it looks like the IPO windows are shrinking in size. And so this is just a data-driven retrospective look at how those cycles have done in terms of duration. So if we go back again, back to the early 2000s, you see that there is definitely a trend in terms of the duration and some of the concentration and intensity. Now, will the press be prologue, or is this just sort of cautionary? I have no idea. But we do know that the markets are volatile. We know they're very finicky. And companies that are seeing opportunities, whether it is to issue debt, whether it is to issue equity, have to move very quickly and decisively because the markets don't necessarily stay open for long. They're very volatile and they're very finicky. Next slide, please. So before we get in our conversation here, just wanted to do some snapshot highlights of things that have been occurring recently, which might inform our conversation. So you've heard a lot about sovereign space. You've heard a lot about the importance of governments as customers or perhaps enablers. There's no question that that is becoming the headline news, right? So we're living in a European super cycle now, which is corresponding to a focus on increased budgets in NATO spending, increased focus on technology development, and insourcing that as much as possible, given sort of some realignment of the post-World War II, call it defense and security paradigm. And that's something that's going to be important going forward. The US Federal Communications Commission has just announced a complete revamp of satellite licensing and spectrum sharing rules. I only say this not to be parochial about America, but the fact that many governments are likely to follow in a level of deregulation to enable space activities as well. So this will be interesting to see how it catches on throughout the rest of the world. Golden Dome, which is a US initiative for missile defense and other types of defense, is already gaining traction. There is a bit of a, call it gold rush in the US in terms of defense primes lining up to position themselves for participation. Many of these US defense primes will have to source technology and support parts supply chain from the rest of the world. So this will be an important development for the space industry. We'll see how the SES-Intelsat merger will be actually, call it operationalized. There's a lot of synergy, but there's a lot of work to be done. I think it'll be a very interesting tale in terms of how legacy space can realign itself and compete with new space. And this is sort of a watch this space going forward as these two companies merge and try to become leaner, meaner, and more competitive. And then Eutelsat secured significant capital in order to essentially buy itself time and runway to bridge the one-way LEO constellation into Iris Squared or whatever comes after Gen 1 and OneWeb. Next slide, please. We have multiple batches of Amazon Kuiper satellites being launched. This has been something that the industry has been waiting for quite some time to see how Kuiper and where Kuiper is going to compete, whether it's going to compete directly with Starlink or whether it's going to do something else. Is it really an extension of AWS and other services, or is it something more? We'll see soon enough. Starlink continues to scale and picks up momentum. Telesat Lightspeed is in construction. Viasat and Marsat continue to grow in IFC and flight services, as well as now announcing a plan to put together something called Equitas, which is a joint venture to create a agnostic 5G non-terrestrial network. The direct device market continues to move forward. Share prices are soaring with AST. Apple Globalstar partnership continues. Apple has put a significant amount of capital in Globalstar to develop its own ability to connect devices roaming off terrestrial networks. SpaceX is launching a dizzying number of DTD satellites. Link is here, Skylo, and there's others in the markets. This is probably one of the most important and interesting things happening today, which is the realignment of spectrum. So we've seen the EchoStar deal. Now, we don't think that's the final chapter. I think you need to very carefully look at what happens next in terms of whether the terrestrial providers, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mo, whether they do something further as a next step. AT&T did pick up some of the spectrum, right? And others, in terms of whether or not there's going to be consortia or single companies that look to compete with SpaceX and Starlink. This all comes down to a strategic race and strategic positioning to avoid disintermediation in terms of your spectrum. Without spectrum, you're not going to be able to compete. That's the bottom line. And that's what we're seeing, some level of essentially logic now coming together. And then finally, we have a number of new industrial primes. Many of them are here. Astranis, Firefly, Impulse, K2, Muon, Swiss212, Rocket Lab, York, Apex, Ascend, Arc, and others, which are challenging the incumbents throughout the technology and hardware stack in the space industry and accelerating innovation cycles. Next slide. So just a sort of a provocative what next. Legacy companies are adapting to the new space economy. We'll see how that goes. New space companies are consolidating to acquire assets, technology, critical capabilities, and direct, in some cases, direct access to customers, i.e. revenue. Adding scale by itself may not be the solution. Again, watch this space. We'll see if that is a truism or not. Government and civil supported programs drive growth, disruption, innovation, and diversification. That has been the lay of the land the last few years. We'll see how important it remains. Capital markets, IPO, and activity, we were talking about that. Are we on the cusp of another cycle, or is this just a little bit of a phenomenon over the past few months that may or may not persist with ongoing potential IPOs? And then another key element, as a lawyer, I have to say this, regulatory frameworks are being strained, they're being stretched, they're being in many ways drawn and quartered. Can the regulatory framework keep up, whether it's radio frequency licensing, whether it's orbital debris mitigation, whether it's activities beyond space? Can they keep up to support the growth and explosive innovation happening in the space industry? Thank you very much. Well, that's a lot, Craig. So why don't we first talk about some of the private and venture financing activity and sort of what you see there, what you dissect from it, and some takeaways.
So first off, this has been the easiest panel I've ever been on. I get a front row seat to. Just to add, thanks for the intro. Just to add a couple of things. Our fund, I'm based out of Washington, D.C. Our fund, is, as Dara mentioned, is a deep tech frontier fund, which basically means that we invest in very early stage companies, and it takes a while for these companies to mature. We call ourselves OpAmp Capital, and for any engineers in the room, yes, it's an operational amplifier. We like to think that we can enhance the company beyond just the cash. I started this fund about 3.5 years ago with my partner, who's actually based here in Taipei, and he's here today. So we sort of, we work both sides of the clock day, morning and night. And we have 16 investments to date, and about 9 of them are in space or space related. And that's primarily because, our background. Also, a venture partner we brought in from Seraphim Capital was probably the largest dedicated space VC, and Josephine Millward. So anyway, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Looking at the last 2 quarters of the private investment, venture investment,
Yep.
and I think some of it maybe even beyond venture investment, what are your takeaways in terms of both the direction as well as the logic of the investments?
Yeah, just taking a step back, listening to the slide deck, 8 billion in investments, 11,000 satellites. Where is that money going to? And to me, and from what I see, it's going to the proliferation of the LEO market. A lot of that is being driven by defense intelligence activities in the U.S. and also in Europe. I'm finding that there's a lot of new funds that have popped up. A lot of the old legacy venture capital funds, such as like Andreessen Horowitz and Founders Fund, others are getting into the venture, or moving closer to the defense intelligence circles. They're even establishing offices in Washington, D.C. now. I also believe that a large part of that is due to, the success that you see in like Palantir, and also Anduril. They recognize, that defense technology can be disruptive, and so a lot of this cash and these technology, and a lot of these technologies are being matured that way.
Thank you. Now, you yourself, I think you talk about deep tech and you look at enabling technologies for space. What interests you, or what are you focused on in terms of looking at the various portfolio companies you look at, and what is enticing, what is not?
Yeah, so since we are an early stage fund, me personally, I tend to look at more like picks and shovels types of companies. I don't make big bets tend not to make big bets in constellations. It's hard to know who's going to win and lose, or who's ever going to make it, in the long run, from a constellation perspective. So I'd rather invest in disruptive technologies that I know somebody, or maybe all of them, will adapt. And so that's sort of the general thesis. We also like to co-invest, so we don't like to go alone. There is, in the U.S., there are a handful of venture funds, and we have a little ecosystem, and we talk about deal flow. A lot of times we invest together. We also have government-sponsored funds, In-Q-Tel, others that we tend to co-invest with, and I have actually brought with me a cheat sheet on specific technologies that I know that the U.S. Defense Intelligence groups are focused on how to mature. Care to hear it?
How much of that can you share with us?
Oh, yeah, it's not a big deal. It's very general. Let's see. Sorry. We could do karaoke when we're done. Okay, here we go. On my Marriott note. Let's see. Onboard computing is a very big thing. This is obviously LEO based, and the ability to actually process data real time in space. Today, the U.S. government has about 4,000 people processing images, staring in images, and trying to figure out what's meaningful and what's not. They would prefer to do it in space. Okay, so What does that mean? They need better GPUs, FPGAs, processing capabilities that currently don't exist on most LEO constellations that are being contemplated today. Power efficiency is a very big thing. Being able to come up with more effective components or power efficient components is a very big deal, because power distribution is essential for many things associated with the spacecraft. Radiation tolerance is also a very big deal in the LEO world. What I see, I've seen maybe, I was at SmallSat back in Utah. There was probably about 18 bus providers now. So buses are becoming sort of a commodity, and payloads are popping up all over the place. It's hard to get your arms around them. But every time I start to lift the hood to find out, okay, well, what are these people doing for radiation tolerance? It's very little. And so I think they're still in sort of prototyping experimental stage. And so we do have regarding Asia, we do have an investment in zero-error systems out of Singapore that sort of mitigates some of these things. Servers, actually having data in space, you process the data, you can move the data, being able to move that data quickly from spacecraft to spacecraft, eliminate ground stations, which, regional ground stations, which we could talk about that maybe, but that could be a threat to certain countries as they protect their gateways and things like that. But that ability to store data and move data is very big. Optical, I find that optical still needs maturing, particularly on the CubeSat level. They weigh too much, they cost too much, and they're just too heavy. And so optical is not quite mature enough yet, from what I've seen. Also, spacecraft jitter is a very big deal. Let's see, sensors. Quantum sensors are very important and very interesting. The ability to detect gravitational motions, different things in space. Making identifications in space using quantum sensors is a big thing. Quantum key distribution, I think there's a number of groups in here that are doing that, is also going to be imperative in the future as quantum computing sort of breaks encryption. Propulsion is also essential. So what I see is that ride shares, for the most, even for constellations that are going up today, if you have a ride share, generally you're left in an orbit that doesn't fit your ITU filing. And so, because it's just where the ride share drops you off. And so when they start to operate, they're not within their plane. And so having propulsion on their LEO constellations that's effective, and also being able to swarm satellites is very keen. Being able to move back and forth between different orbits, having highly effective propulsion systems is critical. Different gases are being experimented with. And last on my list, I'm sorry if I'm hogging the time, alternative GNS, the ability to have greater precision associated with the GPS system today is essential. Ultimately, if we move towards autonomous things, whether it's autonomous cars, submarines, flying cars, we need better precision than what currently exists in GPS. And so we have a company in TrustPoint we invested in that has a solution in C-band. They have a major competitor that operates in L-band. We think that's a little congested in L-band, but that ability is going to be essential going forward. I think for where I see overall the satellite industry and where it's moving. So I know a lot of people here are in GEO. But most of the money that I see that's moving, and particularly at the early stages, is LEO.
Thank you for sharing your list. And while I'm not Craig's lawyer,
it's for sale, by the way.
I was going to say that this is not investment advice, and prior performance does not guarantee future results. So please take that with a grain of salt. It's a personal view as where you might want to look at potentially investing.
For the record, we have zero exit at this point.
Fair enough. You heard it there. Still a very good list. We only have a few minutes left, and I'd like to leave a minute or two for questions. Let's try to bring this back around in terms of, because you have operations and you have a partner here based in Taipei, What do you see as the challenges in terms of being an investor, early stage investor for the ASEAN region, right? We've talked about Europe, we've talked about the US, we've talked about China. What are the challenges, what are the opportunities in terms of capital, early stage or maybe growth stage capital, in the ASEAN region?
Yeah, good question. We don't really see a lot of, so Singapore seems to have a very mature space ecosystem. They also have a mature investing base. Again, going back to that theme or the thesis that we like to co-invest, we're engaged pretty heavily with the other venture capital firms in Singapore. Japan is actually maturing, and we see a lot of activity there. But the other countries, we just don't have that visibility into the venture community, whether they exist or not. I don't know, and I also just don't see these companies. So there may be good nuggets out there, but we just don't see them. And then, assuming we do make the investment, we have the challenge of how do we get that technology into the U.S. There's a lot of barriers to entry to find your way on, say, a Space Defense Agency satellite, and they're very particular about where those parts are manufactured. So that's a challenge for U.S. VCs. Exits, how do we exit? Okay, we made this investment in the U.S. Our investments are very codified, meaning we have simple agreements to finance. We have convertible notes. We have Series A. Most of the paperwork is well defined. In Asia, you have CFIUS issues. It's a lot more complicated. So then when you talk about exits, IPO market, we had a slide on IPO market, but that's not generally where we look at IPO market. To me, the IPO market is more or less, this is a company that is looking for shares to trade in acquisition. And if you look at sort of like the Rocket Labs and even the recent one that we saw, right, these are public companies where they're basically trading stock, not cash. And so we don't really look at, okay, well, is there an exchange here in Asiana that we can get our exit? We're going to be dependent upon an M&A activity. So we probably need good lawyers for that. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, Craig, I'll try to address the first question. What's a comfort level of valuation? So, frankly, at the end of the day, that's what the market does. We don't do that. We don't set the valuations. You look at precedents, you look at comparables. That's generally how those valuations are established. It's a market-driven, comp-driven dynamic. I don't know if you want to try for the second one.
More investments will be directed towards later stage startups, early stage. Do you see the government as the only primary source of this funding? Well, no, but look, a lot of funds in Asia are funded by governments, so it is sort of. U.S. has a lot of private capital in the VCs, but in Asia, most of the VCs are funded by governments. We're not funded by a government, I will say. And then as far as like valuations, there's metrics for that. Cash flows is important, and having a multiple on those cash flows are obviously important. So yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you, Craig. I think we're out of time, but feel free to come up to Craig if you'd like to continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dara, and thank you, Craig, for the wonderful session. And now we